schedule. This is an excellent opportunity. We really enjoyed working on this case, and we'd especially like to thank IANA for sponsoring this competition, as well as the University of North Florida for hosting this. We realize that without those two, this wouldn't be possible, so we'd like to extend our greatest thanks for that. With that being said, my name is Billy Fisher.
I'm Gerry Daniel.
I'm Jayson Mullins.
And I'm Logan Moody.
Just to give you guys a brief overview of the history of the Florida East Coast Railway. The railway was originally established back in 1885 by Henry Flagler, right near Jacksonville. In 1912, the railway was extended towards Key West, but that was later destroyed by a hurricane a little over 20 years later in 1935. As you all know, the Great Depression hit in 1929. That sent FEC spiraling downwards into bankruptcy. They had difficulties coming out of that bankruptcy for a few decades after that until 1961 when they emerged from bankruptcy. In 1883, FEC became part of the Florida East Coast Industries, and they just recently, in 2010, FEC broke off from Rail America, and they hired Jim Hertwig as their new president. We have a problem? Sorry about that. It's okay.
Okay. You did? Okay, good. We start.
Thank you.
Can you check the cords? So if you bump the cord, it would move the
Oh,
circuit.
there we go.
That's a good way to start.
All right. So I guess we're back on. All right. You good? Yeah. Okay. All right. So currently, as it stands today with FEC, they operate roughly 350 miles of rail between Miami and Jacksonville. Out of those 350 miles, they primarily deal with 5 main commodities. Those commodities dealing with intermodal, aggregator, crushed stone, automobiles, food, and ethanol. Now, out of those 5 commodities, 2 in particular stand out. Just this past year, in 2014, FEC had 525,000 revenue-producing rail movements. Of those 525,000, 76% were actually intermodal and 11% were aggregate, so that's making up a huge portion of their rail movements. And of the percentage that were intermodal, 60% actually moved via container and 40% moved via trailer. It's also important to note some of the core competencies that FEC deals with. The geographic location of the railway going up along the east coast of the state of Florida. They run right through Cocoa Beach, so they've got great accessibility to get to Orlando as well as some other places in central Florida. Also shown through our heat map here, they run right through some of the most populated areas in the state of Florida, and then they also connect to a couple of major Class 1 railroads such as CSX and Norfolk Southern, and then they connect to some of the more major highways in the state of Florida to be a little more accessible. As I mentioned a couple slides ago, FEC deals with 5 main commodities. They deal with intermodal, aggregate, automobiles, ethanol, and food. But what I didn't mention was how they deal with that. They have a variety of different material handling services through rail, intermodal, and truck. And between those different services and the commodities that they transport, they're able to link themselves to a wide range of customers for great ways to open up their profitability.
So for shippers looking to go to the FEC, there are a few different criteria that one must consider. It first starts with transportation cost. Weight and mode of transportation is huge factors that go into these costs. Also, transit time and the reliability of that transit time. Is the carrier able to be capable in sending these items out? Are they capable of having the right amount of freight, or do they need any special requirements like a refrigerated truck, say for items like produce? Also, accessibility and security are factors that must be taken into consideration when a carrier's ability to deliver the good to its final destination in the same manner that it was delivered to them. So the FEC is faced with a couple problems getting goods in and out of Central Florida. Option 1, containers are sent into the Port of Miami or the Fort Lauderdale ICTF, and they are blocked together and sent north 205 miles to Cocoa Beach. At Cocoa Beach, they are transferred over to the FECH and moved over towards Orlando. At Orlando, the goods are unloaded and then shipped back towards Cocoa Beach, where the goods are transferred from highway back again onto rail, shipped back down south, where the container now can go towards the ports for export.
And one of the other proposed initiatives is expanding the Cocoa facility there, the intermodal facility. And we did a let's do a break-even analysis on that facility. Facility improvements would cost $5 million, and we'd also have to make a container yard that costs about $100,000. And the reason behind this is with the Panama Canal expansion, we're expecting to see a lot more demand flowing into that facility, and so they would need to expand it. Let me just describe this chart real quick. Basically, the three lines represent different demand projections. So one is the current, the middle one is a 10% demand increase, and the other one is a 20% demand increase. And currently, around 50 intermodal containers, roughly 50 intermodal containers are going northbound per train movement, and there's 6 train movements going northbound out of Miami or the Fort Lauderdale area every day. So based on those numbers, the percentage on the horizontal axis represents the number of orders that are going northbound into that Cocoa Beach facility, percentage of those orders being diverted to Orlando versus percentage being just shipped, straight north into Jacksonville. So as you can see, once you hit about 30-35% threshold there, you start to see a diminishing return, and right at about 5 to 8 years, it's looking like at that level of demand is where we'll break even on that facility. Also thinking about buying new tractors to service that route, and each new tractor costs roughly $120,000. And if that truck can make 3 round trips per day, it would take approximately 2.7 years to break even on that tractor.
So option 1 definitely has some strengths and benefits, but FEC is also considering option 2. And that is goods coming into the Port of Miami or the Fort Lauderdale ICTF are transferred over to the Halea terminal, where they are transferred from the 40-foot international containers. The goods are transferred to the 53-foot domestic containers, where when the goods are sent back to the Port of Miami, the international container is empty and it can be sent out to the port. Where now we have a 53-foot domestic container that can travel up the FEC towards the Cocoa Beach area, where it is again unloaded from rail, shipped over to Orlando via FECH, where the goods are unloaded there, and the domestic container now can go back to the Cocoa Beach area, loaded onto the rail, and then shipped again north to the Jacksonville terminal.
Okay, just some highlights on the transload cost analysis. Here, went online and found some container rates going from Shanghai to Miami, Port of Miami, and made this cost analysis here that shows that it's actually a little under $500 cheaper for customers to utilize the rail intermodal going up to Cocoa Beach and then over to Orlando, rather than just doing a direct shipment from Miami into the Orlando area via truck. Also, just some benefits on transloading. The first benefit is the ability to take a 40-foot container. You can take 3 40-foot containers and you can transload them onto 2 53-foot domestic containers. And that cuts down on the number of movements that those trailers, the amount of time that those trailers get touched, which can also reduce damage and also reduces cost to the customer based on drayage fees. Also, most international containers are shipped floor to ceiling instead of palletized. So it's a lot harder for DCs and warehouses to unload those when they're being delivered. So an advantage of transloading is the ability to put all those products onto pallets for more easy unloading. Also, demurrage, being able to unload everything off of the international container and send it back out either empty back to Asia, or it can be filled and sent back out again. I know a lot of shippers or carriers do that because sometimes it makes a lot more sense to just ship it back empty rather than have it sit around and wait for a shipment to come in, and which could take several weeks. So just that turnaround time is a lot better using transloading. Also, some of these international containers are very heavy, and they can't just be loaded directly onto a truck without incurring overweight fees. So just that weight compliance is also an advantage of transloading.
Also, we were able to identify some other benefits of transloading. We identified commodities coming into the port of Miami per dollar value. And we also include this chart over here to the left that includes easily transloadable items by commodity. And we actually ranked those by dollar value coming into the port. And we were able to identify that it is worth FEC's while to actually explore this transloading option, because there's high dollar values coming into this port. And also we highlighted the items that FEC was trying to utilize to exploit Central Florida. And there was high dollar values of these items also coming into the Port of Florida, so we could utilize transloading to exploit Central Florida by doing this as well.
Okay. I also analyzed a container coming from Shanghai to Los Angeles, going over the land bridge to all the way across the country to Orlando, versus the cost of going through the Panama Canal as is and into the Port of Miami through auction 2. And we actually determined that it's a little bit cheaper to go the land bridge route, but as Jason's going to describe and explain a little bit in a second, that should change definitely based on the Panama Canal expansion.
So with the Panama Canal expansion, it's obvious that it's kind of hard to interpret how demand is going to be affected on the east and west coast, but what is obvious that's going to happen is cargo coming from Asia through the port, through the canal, is going to decrease dramatically. And so with that, with rising West Coast inflation rates, West Coast rail rates rising, going from West Coast to East Coast, and West Coast port congestion, it would seem that the southeastern ports are easily set up to exploit that Central Florida area. And so what really differentiates FEC from all these ports is the Port of Miami and its competitive advantage. Its infrastructure is far ahead of other ports, and FEC actually has direct access to the Port of Miami through its rail and through the highway system. And so through its rail and highway system, it actually has access to CSX and DNSF, or through Norfolk Southern, to actually the National Railroad System and the National Highway System. And it also has installed 7 superposed Panamax canals to actually accommodate for this increase in capacity from 5,000 TEUs to 13,000 TEUs.
It's also important to consider some other factors when dealing with the FEC railway, in addition to just profits or cost savings or anything like that. As you may know, there's a new railroad that's being built right now. It's going to be connecting Cocoa Beach into Central Florida and the Orlando area, and that's in addition to this railway going from Jacksonville to Miami. As part of the All Aboard Florida program, which has its roots going back to Henry Flagler, who obviously started FEC back in 1885, that's had a lot of great benefits to the state of Florida outside of what it benefits FEC. So you're converting highway travelers and you're putting them on the rail, you're lowering emissions, you're increasing sustainability that way, you're also increasing jobs inside the state, and then it's also privately owned, so there's no taxpayers for that. So there's a lot of excellent benefits that this railway will provide in addition to just profits for FEC.
Okay, another option to look into is freight consolidation, and there's a huge trade imbalance, obviously going into South Florida. Much more is coming into South Florida than is going out. So one way to make up for that trade imbalance is to consolidate freight in South Florida and ship it into those empty backhauls. And this will help out industry in South Florida as well by allowing smaller shippers trying to get into shipping around the world or around the country through omni-channel retail, going online and having that seamless transition of online sales and brick and mortar sales. So a freight consolidation center might be something to dive further into to hopefully reduce some of those empty backhauls and exploit that.
So other costs and savings that FEC might need to consider once they explore the option 1, option 2, or as you all probably know, FEC just announced, I think 2 days ago that it was, to actually acquire these 24 LNG locomotives. And we figured out that per Class 1 railroad, each locomotive can save a company in fuel cost savings around $200,000 per year. And we ran that with about a 4.5% fuel consumption compared with a Class 2 and a Class 1 railroad. And that would account for about a $9,000 cost savings per locomotive, multiplied by those 24 locomotives. That would come to around $215,000 a year in fuel cost savings. And there's also diesel conversion costs in the long run. If FEC wants to look at converting those diesel locomotives to LNG locomotives, it's also dependent on the life cycle and the age of the diesel locomotives, but they can convert these for around $400,000 to $1 million. And also, I mean, the added environmental increase is the lower emissions, as LNG is the lowest emitting fossil fuel. And you also receive larger bulk discounts for this LNG fuel. And the last thing we really wanted to talk about was safety involved with when these shippers and suppliers try to select between modes from railroad to trucking. We identified as obviously railroad being the safer way to travel, is going from the projected fatalities per year railroad are around 1 million or around 1,000 as opposed to trucking is around 4,000. And the incidents per year around 20,000 as opposed to trucking is around 100,000.
Okay, in conclusion, based on our analysis, we figured it would be best for FEC, or most beneficial for FEC, to implement both options or a combination of both options, especially based on the added demand that they're going to realize once that Panama Canal expansion has been completed and those large container vessels can come in. And one thing I want to say earlier, with those larger vessels, it's going to drive down that container shipping costs a lot, just based on economies of scale that these larger vessels can realize. So that's just really going to drive that down and make it much more competitive. Also, increased freight consolidation for empty backhauls, and just to leverage that core competency of having a rail line just directly, going through the east coast of Florida, where most of that population density is. So, if you guys have any questions, we'd be more than happy to answer them for you right now.
I'll start out, go back to your calculations. You had I just wanted, it was like maybe the third slide. Well, go back down one. You had it there too. What is your unloading at $435? What are you thinking of?
That was taking it off of the ship and putting it onto rail.
It's your lift charge.
Yes.
Or is it service?
Yes.
You say that the Panama Canal is going to have a reduction in the costs per container delivered to South Florida versus mainland bridge. Do you have any data on that? I mean, do you have an idea what the slot cost reductions are?
We just know that, we don't have any data on that necessarily, but we know that these larger vessels, actually they're going to be roughly close to 3 times larger than the Panamax vessels now. And those run a lot more efficient per container than the smaller ships. So it was kind of hard to really make a projection on how much savings we're going to realize there.
But we do know that demand coming out of Northeast Asia, I believe it was 10.2 million TEUs coming from Northeast Asia are coming into the United States. Out of that 10.2 TEUs, 69 or 61% of that is headed to the East Coast, directly to the East Coast, and the remaining 39% of that is actually being offshored on the West Coast, and then having to go to the East Coast via intermodal from CSS or Union Pacific. So with that 39% that is having to go across the land bridge after the Panama Canal is established, a certain percent of that 39% will be able to be diverted into South Florida. So that will raise I assume the rates of like CSX and Union Pacific railways from California to the East Coast, because they're losing a little bit of their demand. But so in return, that should lower the cost of those goods that are actually diverted coming straight from Northeast Asia through the Panama Canal up towards the East Coast.
Anything else?
All right, thank you very
Thank
much.
you.
All right,
Thank you.
really appreciate it.